Well, hello and welcome. I'm glad that you're here with us as we continue our chronological read through of the Bible. Yesterday we read some Psalms, one an exceedingly dark psalm, others psalms of praise. Today we're going to return to the book of Chronicles, and well, it's seemingly endless list of names and places. You know, it's important to remember in the midst of all those names and places that the chronicler is keenly interested in making it clear to the exiles who've recently returned to Jerusalem that they are the legitimate heirs of God's covenant and all of its intended promises or attendant promises. The same is important for us. I mean, if this remnant that's returned to Jerusalem is not the legitimate heir, then God's promise of a Savior from Abraham's offspring crumbles for us as well. The names that we've been reading and will yet read link the remnant to God's promise dating all the way back to the book of Genesis, or God's promises dating all the way back to the book of Genesis. The chronicler has spent considerable time with the tribes of Judah and Levi as they bear the promises of the royal and priestly lines respectively. But now he's also going to provide information for all of the tribes because the remnant that's returned represents God's promise to all of Israel, not just to a few select tribes. You might notice as we read this chapter 7, that the chronicler goes through the remaining tribes really quite quickly. He does provide genealogical material on the tribe of Benjamin actually 3 times in this early part of the book. So clearly Benjamin's an important tribe. You know, Benjamin is the tribe from which Saul came. It's actually the only tribe that remained faithful to the house of David at the time of Jeroboam's rebellion against Rehoboam, the son of Solomon. And most of those who returned from the exile were from the tribes of Judah, Levi, or Benjamin. So that's why Benjamin, Judah, and Levi all get so much attention in these chronological or these genealogical listings. You might notice some interesting tidbits as you read through the seemingly endless list of names in chapter 7. Quite a few women are mentioned from the tribes of Manasseh, and a woman from Ephraim is also mentioned. She's actually mentioned as the founder of 3 cities. These mentions of women remind us that under certain circumstances, women had inheritance rights, and clearly at times they took positions of leadership in the community. Also, there's an interesting account about 2 of Ephraim's sons who were killed while rustling cattle in Gath, something that would have happened early in the days of Israel's time in Egypt, in other words, long before the Exodus. Apparently, the children of Israel were traveling in and out of Egypt at least in the early days. Let's see now, chapter 8. In chapter 8, you might recall the name Ehud. He was the left-handed judge who saved Israel from the king of Moab. Or maybe the mention of Gibeon might remind you of that people of the promised land who tricked Joshua into a treaty and promising that they would not be destroyed, even though they were people of the promised land and should have been destroyed. In chapter 9, there's an emphasis on the names, in chapter 9, the emphasis of the names shifts as the chronicler now looks to names of those who returned from the exile to Jerusalem, to Judah. So up to this point in time, we've been talking about the lineage of those people who went into exile. Now we're talking about those people who came out of exile. They are a remnant of all Israel, and it's through them that God will continue his covenant and deliver his promises. You'll also read a bit about the duties of the Levites in quite a bit more detail than we have thus far. The chapter closes with the genealogy of King Saul, which is a lead into chapter 10, which will describe the final days and the final days of Saul and the failure of Saul to follow in God's ways. So actually chapter 10 obviously comes next. And we actually now have some narrative again. I know it's been a while, but here's some narrative again. You're going to read about the death of Saul. It's not new. You read about it at least twice already, but it sets the stage to talk about King David. the one who will be a king after God's own heart. The chronicler really doesn't spend any time on Saul's many accomplishments or his numerous failures, save this one, his final failure at Mount Gilboa, where all but one of his sons are killed in battle, and where Saul himself takes his own life after having been wounded in battle. Saul had been unfaithful to God. It cost him the kingdom, it cost him his life. The chronicler closes his words on Saul by saying that because of his unfaithfulness, God put him to death and turned the kingdom over to David, which is where we'll pick up again, the day after tomorrow. Tomorrow we're going to return to reading a few more Psalms. May God be with you and bless you. As always, I pray that your time, even when it's reading large lists of names, is edifying and that you're learning and growing. I look forward to gathering with you again tomorrow.